What's up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of Color Scheme Breakdown. This is the series in which I ramble entirely too long about one particular color scheme in question, giving you my overall thoughts and opinions on it after sharing what the color scheme is, of course, and any big history stuff for it if it had a major revision or anything. From there, I go over my thoughts, likes, dislikes, opinions, and how well I think the color scheme fits the faction in question. And then wrap things up with some thoughts and ideas on how to achieve this color scheme in a sharp looking model without having to be an expert painter. I'm not an expert painter at all, so I always look for little workarounds and things to keep in mind and do to help you achieve the color scheme without having to know a lot of advanced techniques. Just a basic kind of platform to springboard off of should you desire. So with that said, it's been a while. I'm going to put a Space Marine chapter up on the chopping block for this. This is a Loyalist Force, second founding successors of the Raven Guard. This is the Raptors. Now, a brief history, history I guess you could say is the word for it, of these guys. Originally called the Raptor Legion when they came out basically in first edition of 40k. Around 3rd ed or so is when they became the Raptors that we know now in terms of name and everything. And I think some point around there-ish, I don't know the exact point in which the color scheme changed, but the color scheme did change to what it is now. So with that said, the current color scheme for these guys is predominantly what you can refer to as a dull green or a drab green type of military drab green color scheme for the entirety of the armor. Red helmet lenses, white squad markings and chapter markings. The chest emblem is done in a silver or a just a plain iron. You could also have it done in a subdued gray if you so desire. Occasionally you might see some shoulder pad trim in a similar color. The weaponry they wield can either be black or the same color as the armor. There's art for both. And that is your basic look. For veterans, they are denoted in a couple of different ways, one of which is a black helmet with a yellow stripe down the center of it, or you could have a veteran sergeant, for example, be represented with a black stripe down the center of the torso. Those are just some ways in which we've seen something different on these models. Or on these Astartes, I should say. So that's their current color scheme. Very different from their original. The original color scheme they had was kind of like a 50-50 almost of between blue and yellow. The blue color was on the torso, the upper leg armor, the arm armor, and the backpack, as well as most of the helmet. Yellow was on the faceplate of the helmet occasionally, so not all the time. On the shoulder pads, and on the knee, shin, and feet armor. Their weapons were in black. Their squad markings and chapter markings tended to be black. Way back in the day, they had a white raptor head with a traditional colored beak and so forth, but that is not necessary. Anyways, two very different color schemes. And because of this, and because of the name change, there is some conflict as to whether or not we are looking at two different chapters truthfully. The common accepted theorem and the way in which it's portrayed nowadays is that they're one and the same, and this is a progression of what they started off as to what they are. Chances are the Legion moniker was dropped because of the fact of their chapter, separating the idea of chapter to old Space Marine Legions. Same reason why the Mentors Legion Space Marine chapter just became the Mentors as well. So, anyways, with that said, one other thing I forgot to make mention of because it's subtle is that in the original color scheme, the hand armor is also yellow, and you probably have seen that. Not a bad color scheme either way. However, as I go into talking about their current color scheme, the green one, I feel it's a much better fit for them personally. I like it more for this chapter, but the blue and the yellow motif they had originally is still not a bad overall scheme. Kind of unique having the yellow hands with the yellow lower legs and the yellow shoulder pads with blue everywhere else, and some of the face masks being yellow as well could be fun for a DIY force or something. Anyways, the current Raptors color scheme is, I think, fantastic. It's very simple, but it works, right? It is really representing a chapter that's all about being really functional. They believe in pragmatism and adaptability and completing the mission and surviving. They don't really subscribe to the idea of martial glory and honor. And I bring all this up not because I'm trying to make this an at a glance at the same time. I can always do that separately, and I will. But I bring it up because you have to look at a bit of their fluff to understand why this dull green, drab style works so well for these guys. This is a green armor color that would seem more at home on Militarum stuff, for example. It fits the way in which they do things. Also, the fact that they're pretty good forest fighters and jungle fighters, also it's helpful. But we're looking at a chapter that isn't afraid, or doesn't have any qualms, is a better way of putting it, with utilizing camouflage. There is Codex approved camouflage for Space Marine chapters to adorn their armor with when the need arises. Most chapters just forego this. In their shock assaults and stuff, they don't really care, and then seeing them makes them that much more terrifyingly effective. The Raptors, with a preference towards range combat, are much more about getting the job done. So if camouflage is going to give them some type of advantage, they're going to go for it. They don't care. So they are definitely the most practical of Space Marine chapters, you could say, and their color scheme is kind of a very practical color scheme. And knowing a little bit about their fluff, the very little that I gave, I think helps kind of understand why this drab green, dull green look, which, quite frankly, if people might say is boring on the onset, and I can understand why, is actually very fitting for this chapter, and I do think it works out well. The black helmet or the black stripe or the yellow stripe on a helmet, these things can help break up the monotony of this type of color scheme, because yes, I can definitely understand why people might look at this and kind of grumble under their breath if they were to paint it, because it's definitely a attrition style paint situation where you're just doing a lot of the same green. It's not even a green that's overly highlighted or shaded at all either. So there is that. However, what the Raptors chapter does have going for them is weathering. It does come across almost as corrosion a bit, but it's more so weathering and caked on mud and stuff. And this is another way in which you can add some pizzazz, if you will, and break up that monotony of collecting these guys if you so desired, because you can go forth and do some weathering in a way that, if I were a practical Astartes with a preference for range combat, how would I be fighting? Taking a knee, going prone, stuff like that, bracing against terrain and all that for their shooting. These things will cause some scrapes and dings and mud to cake on certain areas, and you can have some fun doing some weathering for sure. Paint up whatever models you have, collect them however you want, but the Raptors are very plain Jane. They don't do a lot of ornateness. Even their Chapter Master isn't that ornate in his equipment in terms of visuals. It's all functionality, pragmatism, practicality, almost a utilitarian aspect of how they approach things. So again, it can make it a bit of a hard pill to swallow if you were looking at tackling these guys, but at the same time, you could flex some creative muscle in doing the weathering and the mud effect and integrating subtle camouflage here and there if you wanted to as well. So, a fan of this color scheme on these guys, because I think it's very fitting. I think given their fluff, the way it's kind of evolved to where it's been at for a while now, if they kept their original color scheme, it just wouldn't have fit very well at all in relation to their fluff. The original color scheme, again, not bad. This is just so much better for them. I really like it, to be honest with you. And I if I had a way, or if I needed to pick up, let's say I was in a league and it was a build up a new force league, I'd probably pick these guys because you can get a sharp looking force and have some fun weathering in pretty quick amount of time. So speaking of that, painting these guys up, you are going to have no shortage of olive drab green, dull green paints. Any water based paint, acrylic based paint company that makes paints for miniatures, models and scale models or miniatures is going to have this type of green. It's quintessential in their arsenal to include it. So with that said, use whatever you have whenever you like the feel of the most. I will say this though, we do have contrast paints for this color, or a contrast paint I should say, in this color, and that's gonna be some good news because one of the things I personally find not so much difficult, but one of the things I find kind of iffy or annoying when it comes to green like this is shading it. Because while you are trying to maybe go for weathering with these guys specifically, you're also trying to get the model to be shaded to a point so you can do some basic subtle highlighting on top of that, but you don't want the shades to look like just more caked on dirt necessarily. So Militarum Green is a contrast paint. You do that over something akin to their Gray Seer, something very similar to that. You put Militarum Green over it, you're going to get a good green base to start from. If you are careful about it, you can put 2 coats to kind of really darken it in and then build up a little bit of highlightings. Any highlighting you do is going to be very subtle. Maybe use Elysian Green and Ogryn Camo, for example, to highlight stuff up, or Strachan Green to help fill in the coloration or anything like that. But my point is, this type of green is not one that's meant for extreme highlighting / extreme shading. So the subtler, the better. Which again, why it could be a bit of a war of attrition for people to paint this up. But the subtler, the better for the green. Anything else is going to pop off of that, whether it's their white squad markings, which you can then carefully weather down as well, or the yellow stripe or what have you. If you're going for weathering, this is a case in which you can really play. Not just doing weathering powders or washes or dry brushing stuff, but if you're careful and don't mind maybe having a sacrificial model to test this out on, you could also take maybe one of the texture paints you really like, maybe Sterling Mud or Battlemire or Mordant Earth, or depending upon what type of weathering you're going for, and you can very carefully, very sparingly lightly apply this to small parts of the model, on the knee pad and on the leg that they would have been crouching on, for example, and have it almost not even be there, very, very subtly there, to give you some of that caked on texture. And then from there you could do a wash over that or whatever to kind of represent maybe streaking and stuff, because maybe it was a lot thicker and then there moisture or whatever. It's just, you could flex your creative muscle that way, and where otherwise you'd be doing ornate things and really making a bold coloration of the armor. In this case, you're having the subtlety of that dull green, and then the basic iron, and then any popping for veteran sergeants with black and yellow. And then from there, really what you're doing in place of doing the ornateness and the bold coloration is weathering, if you so desire, in ways in which you can envision how these guys have been fighting in a very practical style. Anyways, that's it for this color scheme. I do thoroughly enjoy it. What are your thoughts on the Raptors color scheme? Is it something that's just too monotone for you in a way, too boring? I can totally understand that, and that is one of the critiques that you do see in the interwebs for these guys. I actually really do enjoy this color scheme, especially for them knowing their fluff. So share your thoughts. Anyways, any other questions, comments, or requests, leave it in the comments section. And until next time, take it easy.